Hello everyone, I'm Jeremy Lessie, founder of PixelFest, and welcome back to the PixelCast. This is the fourth PixelCast in total so far. I've been doing this for about a month. And of course, our mission at PixelFest is growing artists and programmers through love of games. Well, actually, that was the old tagline. Now we just say it's growing through love of games. So we tried to generalize it a little bit. We were very focused on programming and art when we did our boot camps during the original PixelFest events. And since then, decided that, there's so many more people that can partake in games other than the artists and programmers. You have people who want to do business. You have people who do marketing. You have people who do design and user experience. And, truthfully, because games are so all-encompassing, it just made more sense to drop the artists and programmers and say growing through love of games. And today is going to be a little bit of a special episode. Obviously, as you can tell from the background, I want to talk about The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. This game was just released last Friday on the Nintendo Switch. I'm super excited about it, having a great time playing it. And, the visual style is very cool. And it actually reminds me a lot of like a Pixar game or a Pixar movie that I can play. I know that was the talk like 20 years ago. Hey, one day we're going to have games that look like Toy Story. And the first time that I ever saw this game, that was what I thought. I was like, yes, I finally have that thing that looks like a Pixar movie that I can play. This is fantastic. And of course, we are also going to do some reflection on PixelFest. We're going to cover the news. And we're going to do a little, let's get techie with it. But what we're going to do is talk about Zelda. We're going to talk about some of the slowdown that's in the game, to be quite honest, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that might be happening. So let's get right into it. With PixelFest, now I have gone on and had two great meetings talking about PixelFest 2020, and I think that we are set to do the best version of the event ever. I think this is going to be, as I've said in past episodes of the PixelCast, this is going to be the format that allows the event to grow and grow and grow. And over the past 4 years, we've done different events of different sizes. In 2017 was actually the largest. We had the event ran almost 5 days, and it was at Slover Library. We started on Wednesday with the Game Jam. The main event was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we had about 5,500 attendees at that PixelFest in 2017. So I think that was the biggest event. In 2018, we weren't partnered with the library in 2018, but we did partner with the Half Moon Cruise and Celebration Center, and it was a wonderful event. It was actually the first year that we were a ticketed event, and it was still great. We only did the event for one day. We actually did the Developer Day, which was a smaller sort of sister event, on Friday, and then we did the main event on Saturday, and it was wonderful. We had about close to 1,000 people that day, so it was still very good for single day attendance. Obviously it's not going to match a 3 to 5 day event, but it was fantastic. But there were some issues with having the event being so centralized, and so in 2020 we're going to be calling this PixelFest open source, and it's going to be less centralized. That's going to be sort of I think the mantra going forward is to open source PixelFest a little bit, and I'm going to divulge more details of that over the coming months. I'm very excited about it. I've had several conversations with people, letting them know what this is all about. They're very excited about it, and I think we're going to get the best combination of everything that we've seen from past PixelFest events in 2020. So. In other news, we did have a PixelFest Devs meetup last week, and it was wonderful. We were at Dave & Buster's in Virginia Beach, and the next PixelFest Devs meetup is going to be at Pixels in Norfolk, which is right there around 21st Street, and so it's right by Yorgos. If you know where Yorgos is, it's right over there, and it's near also 757 Makerspace. It's sort of in that area, so come on out on the third Tuesday it will be from 6 to 8 p.m. If you are a player, it doesn't matter. We call it PixelFest Devs, but the truth is, PixelFest exists as this bridge from being a game player to being a game maker. And, and there's a lot of space in between there. So we have plenty of people who really just like to play games, and they're sort of dabbling or thinking about dabbling with making them. So it really is something that anybody that has even a passing interest in game development can come out, hang out, we're going to talk games, so a lot of it's just going to be talking about playing, but you also might learn something. You might meet a team member. You might have a skill set that somebody needs on their project. You can just offer somebody feedback on their project. So it's a great time, and I'm going to have to mention that on every PixelCast from now, going forward. Let people know about these meetups. We need more people to come out, more people developing games here in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and so there's that. Now, as far as the show goes, I hope that this week is a little bit more polished. I obviously being the fourth week, and hopefully you've noticed that each week I've tried to step the game up a little bit, tried to find things that were lacking. Obviously the first episode was extremely lacking because I literally just sat down on my laptop, blasted this thing out for 36 minutes, tried to find a way to make it look cooler than just like my wall rendering behind me, and it was pretty rough. So I have been happy with the progress each week myself, and hopefully this week will be the best one yet. And with that, I want to get on with the news. So there is, first of all, before we get into it, a ton of news. So much has happened since the third PixelCast last week. I was actually sort of flabbergasted as I was going through all of the news that's occurred and how much in the gaming industry, even on the VentureBeat side of things. So we're going to start out with Gamasutra, of course, and we have here a headline, sort of a follow-up to a headline that we had a couple weeks ago about Apple Arcade. The service launched successfully with about 70 games, and I've been seeing some people that are pretty excited about this. Some of the developers that I'm friends with have made content for the system already, and they're very excited about it. And so there seems to be a lot of positive energy. I personally haven't tried it yet, but because of all this positive energy, I'm thinking about maybe dipping my toe in for a month and seeing what it's all about. Share your hard-won expertise at GDC 2020 Art Direction Summit. So if you are an art director, anybody that's done this work, it's this is extremely detail-oriented work. I've worked with a number of great art directors over my career, and if you're in that field, this is possibly a good time for you to get up and work on your speaking game and go. I think if you do this, maybe you can go to GDC for free. Don't quote me on that. I'm not positive, but at any rate, this is a good way to get yourself out there. I will say that some of the biggest career advances I had came because I decided to do a talk. It's amazing what getting up and speaking will do for your career. So this is a great opportunity out at GDC in 2020. Borderlands 3 has sold over 5 million copies in 5 days. I just caught a commercial for this game, and it was so crazy. It had, I think, somebody like at a salon, and it's like as if they're getting their hair done, and the mask started rendering on top of their face. It was very strange. I wasn't really sure what to make of it. I think it was entertaining, and obviously Borderlands has some, I want to say ravenous, like almost ravenous fans is what I've noticed over the years. And there's also, there was a great article from a developer who was formerly part of the gaming press and had formerly been very critical of game developers, who had worked on Borderlands 2, and when that game came out, they were shy of like a perfect review. And he had this article he put out a few years ago where he spoke about how difficult it is to make a game and really get to that sort of perfect level, and how they, I think that they had felt like they had reached that, and when they got reviews that were, I think they got like an 89 out of 100, which is a great review, of course, but how, that actually was sort of heartbreaking. And if I find time, or if you find time, I'll put it on the show, or you just go look it up and check it out. It was a fantastic article by a former member of the press who got into game dev. Control's Epic Games Store exclusivity initially cost Epic $10.45 million. So, this is interesting. We have, obviously the Epic Games Store now. We have Steam. We have itch.io. We have the Discord, Nitro store. And it seems like it wasn't even 2 years ago that somebody wrote an article essentially saying there's no point in competing with Steam. And somehow a bunch of people, maybe they were already working on their stores, maybe not, who knows. But basically, a bunch of people decided, you know what? No, we're going to go ahead and compete with Steam. And it's funny how we've had essentially a plethora of stores pop up over the last couple of years. And obviously, Epic has always been a powerhouse in the games industry. It seems like forever anyway. It's been a long time. And of course, they're going to do well with that store. And, but they're paying out big bucks, it looks like, to get exclusive content. So, Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on. I think back in the day, it used to be that game consoles like Nintendo and Sega, NEC maybe would fight over who gets, the big game on their console. And now what it seems like we're seeing is these content stores, these whole stores, and what they do is they're going to be fighting for these exclusives, So now we might get our games on every single platform, but what store are you going to buy it from? And it's very interesting, the ebb and flow of making everything available everywhere and then pulling back and competing, and how that happens in the industry. Steam must allow digital games to be resold, rules French courts. I found this headline interesting because I've been paying attention to this. I've been paying attention, as I think we talked about on the second episode. GameStop is having a hard time, and part of their business is obviously selling used games. That's a huge part of their business. And when a consumer buys a game, they are supposed to own that. Now, of course, if you have jumped into a game like Rocket League or probably Fortnite, I think there are a number of games that are, games as a service. And when you boot those games up, there'll be an end user license agreement that you basically have to sign. It's like a contract. More or less says that you have a license to use this, but it's not yours, that type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how the industry reacts to regulation like this going forward that says that, hey, if a consumer buys your game, they've bought a copy of this game, and even if it's a digital copy, they need to be able to resell it. And I imagine that it looks like Steam will have to start adding a feature where they can resell a game that somebody has purchased. Google Stadia Founders Edition pre-order bundle has sold out in Europe. So this is very interesting. It seems that people are excited about Stadia, and they are excited about game streaming. I think, some people, I think, not so excited about the fact that they have to pay a monthly subscription and they still have to purchase the games. That was maybe the one criticism that I came up against, but other people, of course, have said, listen, I don't have to buy a graphics card anymore. I can play it on any device. If I want to play it in 4K, I can. If I want to play it on my mobile phone, I can. And so it does seem that people do recognize the value proposition here. One thing that I'm paying attention to, of course, is, what internet speeds do you need to really get the highest quality? And I think we've seen you need like a 25 megabit per second, if I can say that, megabit per second connection in order to run a 4K game. So that's a whole lot of bandwidth, and I'm not sure how many people have, that high speed bandwidth. I know currently I do not have that type of bandwidth, and so that's going to be an expense. Like maybe I won't need to buy a graphics card, but I will need super high speed internet. And to some degree, when I look at Stadia, what I see is that scene from The Wolf of Wall Street where he says, hey, sell me this pen. And of course, the pen is Google Fiber, and Google Stadia is the thing that gets you onto that. So we'll see how this works out, but there's certainly benefits to Stadia for players, and I'm paying attention more and more to those. Obviously, I'm very interested in the streaming space with some of the work that I'm doing, and so I'm going to keep a close eye on this stuff. Making people understand and care about your game. So I think this is maybe one of the things that especially technical developers might struggle with a little bit is that, and you'll notice that companies like Nintendo do a great job of this. Way before you ever play the game, they are showing you screenshots, tutorials describing the mechanics, having the developers speak about the game, putting out umpteen videos describing the game and the mechanics, and going through it all again and again and again, so that essentially by the time you're playing the game, you have already empathized with the whole development process and the whole philosophy behind that game. And this is something that I feel our team did probably too late when we were working on SwapFire. I mean, we tried, and then after we launched the game, we realized, wow, people really don't understand this game to the fullest extent. And we came up with some content after release to do this, but this is an article that somebody put up on Gamasutra that you probably need to check out, because getting this understanding and to care about your game and essentially empathy with everything, all the hard work that you put into it, and empathy with the mechanics behind the game and the point, like, why does this game exist, is probably one of the most important things that you can do. I mean, obviously, games need to have high frame rates, and they need to have nice graphics, and there's all these things that if we take the old review mechanics from video game magazines and video game reviews of the past, I feel like a lot of times that's what people try to hit. Hey, it's got to be fun, and it's got to have good graphics, it's got to have good music, da 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 da, and they go on down the line with these sort of objective measurements, and then there's this whole other side of communication with the player. So this is probably a great article for you to check out in order to understand how to empathize with your players a little better. mobile AR game Dragon Quest Walk passes 5 million downloads in Japan. So this looks like it's a Japan exclusive game right now, and hopefully it's going to come out in the rest of the world soon. Pokemon Go changed, I think, the game for AR. I remember playing some AR stuff on my iPhone even back in 2010, 2011. It was pretty limited. The concept was out there, but it wasn't until Pokemon Go that we saw this explosion. And I think we can expect to see a lot more of that in the way of AR games. And with this having 5 million downloads already in its first week, it looks like that trend's going to continue. Nintendo fought hard to lower Switch Lite's price to $200, say suppliers. So this is an article that sort of dives in on the supplier side and the components, like everything that went into the Nintendo Switch Lite that was also released just last Friday alongside The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. And I can only imagine the struggle back and forth between a company like Nintendo and its parts suppliers, and how can everybody win? And how can the customer win? How can Nintendo win? How can the suppliers win? So on and so forth with something like this. So it's an interesting piece and something to consider. Checking out and reading just to get a greater understanding of manufacturing and how that affects the industry. Get a job. Sony Pictures Entertainment is hiring a senior product manager. So if you are at that point where you've got some experience and you're looking to get a job, a senior product manager, this is probably something that's a little bit more high level, but you might be somebody looking for that. And so, go to the Gamasutra game boards. There are Gamasutra job boards. I'm sorry. There are tons of jobs on these boards every single day, and certainly something to check out. Okay, the United Nations and PlayStation will fight climate change together. So this is very interesting. It seems that Sony is working with the United Nations on lowering their carbon footprint, which I think this has got to be some good PR for Sony. And the way diving into this in a little more detail, what it looks like is that Sony has been working on the PlayStation to make it more efficient and, to more or less just use less energy while delivering the same value proposition to players. And I think that can only be a good thing. I mean, however you feel about climate change, if some company out there is taking their product, making it more energy efficient, I don't think anybody can argue with that. That seems like a good thing to do. So, Unity acquires game marketing and analytics specialist Delta DNA. So I think this is very cool to see Unity coming around and acquiring various companies. Obviously, Unity is growing at a tremendous rate. I think the last valuation on the company was $6 billion, and it seems that we can only expect to see them acquiring more and more companies as they attempt to balloon up to become a $60 billion company that I think their goal is to basically dominate the AR space. But they're in so many spaces, I guess it's difficult to tell. They can grow out in multiple directions. So it'll be interesting to see what other companies they acquire. All right, so that's all we had for Gamasutra news today. I'm jumping over to VentureBeat, and there are a lot of stories on VentureBeat. I'm probably going to run through them pretty quickly because we are already at 19 minutes. The Augmented City, how technologists are transforming the Earth into theater. I think this is very interesting, something I've thought about a great deal. If you have seen my work or been following me for a while, you would know that I created an app called CAR. It was C.AR for iPhone, released that back in 2012. And this was the first app that I created where I sort of had the idea that, hey, like making AR movies with this, like we're recording cars and, little movies. I had some stuff where I put dinosaurs in the scenes and things like that. And now that we see Pokemon Go and, like we have the Dragon Quest AR game, obviously it was in a previous headline, it only makes sense that we're going to create these sort of cinematic experiences in AR and tie that to geolocation. So I think this is going to be really interesting going forward, and probably something I'd like to do more of with PixelFest as we have the festival in downtown Norfolk. AWS launches G4 instances with NVIDIA Tesla T4 chip. So this T4 chip is used both for artificial intelligence and for rendering. Now, on the gaming side, of course, with cloud rendering and cloud gaming becoming such a big thing, we want to, what Google Stadia is doing, what PlayStation Now is doing, what, Steam is even doing. We want to be able to render a game somewhere, transfer it to any other device, control it from any other device. And it seems like NVIDIA and Amazon are probably sort of preparing for more companies to be able to create on-demand streaming services on their platforms. So this is it's an interesting one, something to watch for sure. the ag tech investment imperative. So this is sort of an offshoot from gaming. We're going to do a little bit of that. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just address what I think is a little bit of an elephant in the room. The last episode, I definitely spoke to, I think, the business and technology side quite a bit, and maybe not as much gaming as some people might like. Nobody actually told me that, but as I went back and reviewed the episode, I noticed that, and sort of coming back to the fact that PixelFest is supposed to be a bridge between gaming and being a game developer and or just a developer, period. Sort of just bridging that gap. You're interested in games, here's how to make a game, and these are the other things you can do with games. So coming full circle back to this article, though, I think this is a very interesting space. Obviously our agriculture and farming, these are super, super important things. We want to eat every day, and we need to be able to produce enough food to feed the planet. We've got a growing population. We need to be able to do that with the smallest carbon footprint possible, and it's got to be efficient. There's so much more that we can do here. Now, there's only been $5 billion over the last 5 years of investment in this space, and it looks like the clean tech sector, according to this article, if you dive in, the clean tech sector has gotten a lot more investment than the agricultural tech sector. So, definitely something to watch. I mean, if climate change is happening and if water levels are rising and all of these things, and regardless, just going to the population rising, right? If we've got a growing population, we need to figure out how to feed people. We need to figure out how to do it more efficiently, and ag tech is the space to do that in. So, and you know what? It's all going to come down to very similar technology as to what we use to make games. So, something to keep an eye on if you have an interest. Batman Arkham VR gets index controller support. No joke. So if you're a fan of Batman Arkham VR, this just seems interesting, I think, with the new index. I think the index, I haven't researched this a lot, but I believe the index is that high-def wireless Vive that I spoke about a couple of episodes back. I think IDSI had that at a PixelFest Devs meetup when we were at Circuit Social a couple of months ago, and so I think that's what they're talking about here. And so, this is a little bit of an older game, but if you have this newer headset, this seems to be good news for you if you really like these two things. So, Call of Duty Mobile launches October 1st. This might be the first mobile game that I play, that I will play and have done so in a long time, because I know there's a certain stigma that goes along with Call of Duty, but I did actually enjoy the games. They were pretty much jump in, shoot stuff. They're quick, they're reflexive, and they can be enjoyable, I think. So this game's going to have content from Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Black Ops. It's going to be sort of a smorgasbord of players' favorites. So it's coming out on October 1st on mobile. Might be worth checking out. France's $5.5 billion startup fund is a bid for digital sovereignty. This article is near and dear to me because what I think we should be doing at Hampton Roads, and I think to a large extent we are seeing this happen, it's digital sovereignty. Right now, Silicon Valley sort of rules the world in this domain. I mean, clearly it's spreading. You can make arguments that there are other hotspot cities, hotbeds where great technology is coming out of. I mean, obviously there's a lot of great technology coming out of Israel, around the globe from Silicon Valley, extremely smart people there. You've got things coming out of China. You've got, in the US, you have various cities, Austin, New York. You can go out to Colorado, and there are these hotbeds. But I found this interesting just because I think more places around the globe need to have this type of mindset with regard to digital sovereignty, right? Like, this space needs to be just as decentralized and as anything else, and doing it geographically to a degree I think makes a lot of sense. I mean, can you imagine if there was a natural disaster or something that happened in Silicon Valley? I mean, I feel like it would be so catastrophic because so much is controlled out of that area. So France here is stepping up big with $5.5 billion, and I'm going to have to keep an eye on this, see where it goes. Hopefully we'll see some more companies come out of France. I personally want to see more companies come out of Hampton Roads, but hey, at least they're doing it. Google Assistant no longer saves voice recordings by default. So getting on here a little bit into, I guess, the privacy. With mobile phones, these devices are so powerful. They can record audio from its microphone. They can record audio and video directly, obviously, out of any app that you're using. They can record the camera on both sides. your browser histories in there. These devices are so personal, and I think this is a good step forward by Google to not save these recordings by default with the assistant. Obviously, there have been a lot of people who have complained in the past they feel like their device is listening to them and then showing them ads, and it's like, well, wait, what's going on here? We've had several stories over the past couple of months where contractors have been hired by companies like Apple to listen to input that's coming in. I think Amazon had the same type of thing with Alexa, where they had people that hired that are sitting there listening in on your Alexa conversations to and hopefully they're just trying to like make the AI better and say yes, they said and the go whatever. But it's a strange thing having privacy, I think, eroded the way it has been by our technology, and this looks like a step in the right direction. Google rolls out Family Link per app time limits and bonus time. Sort of along the same lines with our digital progression. We've gone so fast, so fast, I should say, over the last 10 years. And obviously, there's some people that are just spending way too much time on their phone. And this looks like it gives the family the ability to say, hey, you can use such and such apps for such and such amount of time. And hey, if you're good, we'll give you a little bit of extra time on PUBG or Pokemon Go or whatever if it's a child that's playing the game. So again, hey, good for Google. This looks like a step in the right direction. YouTube taps machine learning to serve the best contextual ads for each user. So this, I would say, as somebody who has been on both sides of this equation, as an advertiser, it sounds great to be able to get the best ad in the best place for certain users. I mean, machine learning, this seems like, like a bullseye for machine learning to use it for ad tech, of course. On the other hand, as a user, when I get ads that are sort of too targeted or too personal, and I can tell that I've been spied on in order to get that ad to me in that way, that actually doesn't feel good to me. I will say, this industry is so driven to try to get these ads so targeted, and really what it ends up coming off as is just super creepy. I don't, to tell you the truth, being on both sides of this equation, I don't know which way it's going to go. I think users at the end of the day, though, drive the economy. And if too many users start feeling like they're creeped out, like their phone's listening to them, or just like getting way too into their personal business and then sending them ads about that stuff. And I'll give you an example. I've been on basically like an electromagnetic detox, let's say, for the last 5 or 6 months. I have been trying to spend less time on my phone. I have tried to turn the power off to sort of keep it away, keep it at bay. I've been researching a little bit more into electromagnetic radiation and so on and so forth. I'll turn the Wi-Fi off when I go to sleep. Wi-Fi is microwaves. And I'm doing a lot of that stuff. Now, I haven't been doing that much social media for the past 6 months. But I guess in the absence of this stuff, and maybe some of the conversations that I've had where even people that I know, I don't know how this happens. Maybe their phones are listening to me because my phone's off. All of a sudden, I started getting ads for basically underwear that block electromagnetic radiation. So if you keep your phone in your pocket, you're not going to get like a lower sperm count or something like that. And this was the type of ad that came through on my feed when one of the few times that I started booting back into social media and checking it out again. And I was like, wow, that is it's way too personal. This thing has been paying way too much attention to me. It knows too much about me, and it just feels creepy. If I wanted to look something like that up, I would. I'm taking my own steps. I don't really necessarily need an ad shoved into my face for that. So we'll see how this stuff goes. Hopefully it's going to back off a little bit. High Fidelity's new mobile app turns your selfies into VR avatars. This is very cool. This is sort of near and dear to me because I worked on a project about 5 years ago called Self-Ski with a local entrepreneur, and we basically took selfies and put them on a keyboard so that you could, instead of putting like an animated emoji into a text message or something like that, you could paste a little selfie face, and it would just be your face sort of green screened out. And and we've seen so much in this space over the last number of years, and it just keeps going. It's like, even if you think back to Nintendo's Mii characters, that probably wasn't even the start of it. There's so many times that people have attempted to sort of get you into the virtual space, and this looks like another step forward, though, because this isn't just like a selfie head or like a character that you sort of create. You take a selfie and you have it looks like a VR character, full 3D model of yourself. So see where this goes. Probably it's going to end up turning into some sort of API that people can plug into their VR apps or something. We'll see what route this takes. Hollywood and Games 4.0, how the love-hate relationship has evolved over time. This is interesting because this article looks like it's taking a step back from another article that was put out a few days earlier, and we'll get onto that one. But in the first PixelCast, I mentioned Marvel's Spider-Man for PlayStation 4. Great game, having a still great time playing it. Every time I boot it up, just like completely, my mind is just so blown by the quality and all the skill and technical acumen that went into this game and the artistry. It's an awesome game. And I actually said that I thought maybe the game was the pinnacle of the sort of representing this lore, right? Like, we've got these fantastic movies and everything. Obviously, Marvel Cinematic Universe is incredible. But is the game actually, the games and the movies seem to sort of tug at each other. And a lot of times, of course, I think the relationship has been that the game is supposed to be a slave to the movie. Now, in this case, we've got these Spider-Man movies, and they're sort of off doing their thing. And when we got Insomniac's Marvel Spider-Man, you can tell this game, they had independence on this game. It's not tied to a movie. It's not really, it's licensed, but it's not that typical type of licensed thing like, hey, let's rush this out because the movie's coming out. We want to, make as much money as possible off of this pop, so let's tie a game to it. It wasn't that. And I just think it's going to be interesting going forward if we're starting to get, more and more sort of independent and authentic in their own way games that represent the lore, how, where this is going to go. It's an interesting article to read for sure. Apple's iOS 13.1 beta reveals AR headsets with 58 to 68 degree field of view. So it looks like somewhere inside of this update, people have found, some references, I guess to either some code or maybe it's in the OS. I didn't actually dive too deep into this article. I just thought it was interesting and exciting. Obviously, AR has been growing everywhere, but Apple has had a focus on it with iOS. We've got ARKit, and it's fantastic. It works wonders, and it seems only natural that at some point Apple is going to introduce a headset that's similar to like we see in Magic Leap or Microsoft HoloLens, that's sort of tied to that ARKit experience. And so it looks like they've got a decent field of view on those headsets. We'll see. We'll see where. I think the user experience will speak volumes. Louis Vuitton partners with Riot Games on League of Legends World Championship. This is kind of a strange story, but that trunk that's standing behind that, if you look at this story, behind that trophy, that is designed by Louis Vuitton. So in the article, dives in, talks about how Louis Vuitton has essentially nothing to do with gaming, but I actually admire this. I think this is cool to try to diversify what you're typically known for. Now, apparently Louis Vuitton has always been sort of associated with sporting events and the trophies, and they've got sort of a long history in that. Not so much in esports, but this is a first foray into that. So it's an interesting crossover for sure, and that trunk looks kind of cool. So NPD, video game business is still growing despite disruption. So the NPD, essentially it is always measuring the sales and doing forecasting and stuff on the gaming industry. And it looks like, people speaking about this disruption, obviously this is all of technology is just growing out in so many directions so fast, whereas 20 or 30 years ago, there were just a handful of devices and it may have seemed like there were a lot, but compared to today, it's nothing. And we're seeing, just so much more of our time is going into the digital realm. But it looks like video games are still holding their own and growing inside of that. Even, there might be some other sectors that are growing quicker, but, games are still a good business. So stick around. Oculus Connect Time Machine. How well has Michael Abrash predicted VR's future? So if you don't know Michael Abrash, he's an extremely talented developer, programmer, engineer. I believe he worked with id Software back in the day with John Carmack, and now works with him again at Oculus. And I've listened to this guy speak a few times, and he's fascinating, and he will get very, very technical, which is fun for me. And so this looks like they're going to sort of go over and say, well, he said this in this year, said this year, said this year. Where are we at now? So that's an interesting article, and I think there's a video to go with this if I remember correctly. So it could be kind of cool. Peaks let me remix augmented reality sounds at Elton John's concert. So I think this is interesting to sort of overlap augmented reality, music. It's all of this convergence, gaming, all sort of at the same time. So this seemed like a very interesting thing. I mean, people love concerts because they're these sort of one-off experiences that are highly valuable because they're rare and they only happen once and they only happen a certain way that time. Being able to, I think, mix augmented reality into that experience and then make it even more personal seems cool. So it just caught my eye. Pixvana's VR training prepares offices for active shooter nightmares. Now, of course, this headline is a little sad. Obviously, this is a real problem that everybody's dealing with. Obviously, in Virginia Beach, there was a tragedy not long ago, and this is sad stuff that we're dealing with. But it looks like Pixvana is hoping that by using virtual reality that they can start training people and help prepare them better in case, and hopefully nobody sees this again, but in case there's an active shooter situation in their office. And so this is one case where maybe gaming technology and VR, which can actually be used to help to train people and might save a life one day. PlayVS raises $50 million more for high school esports platform. So I think this is very interesting. I don't know if you say this is Playverse or PlayVS. This is the first time I've ever seen this company name. Obviously, it's a big number. They raised $50 million to bring esports, into high schools. And as a platform, I'm guessing this is some way to manage the whole experience, to manage the brackets, to probably manage video sharing, and who knows whether capabilities are built into this platform. This could be very interesting to check out. Obviously, esports is growing at a tremendous rate. It looks like it's going to be part of the Olympics, and obviously we've got big shows all around the world now. With esports, more people watch esports. Well, I don't know if that's actually correct. More people watch other people play video games now than play video games themselves. And that's a number I think that switched over. There was a flippening around 2015. And so just like with, baseball or basketball or soccer, at some point there were people playing those sports and it turned into a professional thing, and eventually it was on TV and everybody was, watching people do that rather than playing it themselves. And so it kind of looks like this is happening. Of course, people play sports in high school, so I suppose it makes some sense to have people playing, esports in high school. There's so many people that are excited about this stuff, and, why not? I had an interesting conversation with somebody at MagFest a couple years back about esports and about, how much of this is sort of like a trainable athletic capability, how much of it is just, biology or, anatomy, the length of someone's arms, the color of their eyes, this sort of stuff. People get really deep into this stuff. This is very interesting, though, to see this stuff sort of making their way into high schools. And Amazon introduces mobile game benefits for PUBG members with PUBG mobile deal. So there's another headline in here about PUBG. They've crossed $1 billion, and is it there? Yeah, surpasses $1 billion in revenue. And of course, look at this. We have Amazon working with them to try to get them onto Amazon Prime. And if they sign up with Amazon Prime, then they get in-game items from PUBG. So it's a pretty big deal. And I think it's interesting that it's with Prime. It probably speaks to the demographic of this game. I sort of would imagine it's skewing a little bit older. I mean, I'm not positive about that. I suppose people that are running households, I know that my wife loves Amazon Prime to get things that we want scheduled and all this to kind of like keep the household running. So maybe it's a child that wants items in PUBG and this is just a good deal. But to me, right off the bat, I'm thinking, wow, this must be skewing a little bit older. And obviously this is a huge deal that PUBG has hit or surpassed $1 billion in revenue. Wow. Nintendo Switch Lite fits in my pocket, but should it? So the Switch Lite obviously came out on Friday. This is very exciting. This is it's a version of the Switch that doesn't really switch. So there's a little bit of a conundrum there. It's a little bit of an oxymoron in a way, but it seems like a logical move for Nintendo. I think that they're probably going to be phasing out the 3DS at this point. That whole DS lineup lasted for a long time, had a really good run. But obviously the Switch is super hot, and this is a way to get people I think people really love handheld games. I tell you the truth, with the Switch, I play it more in handheld mode anyway than I play it up on the TV. Usually somebody in my house is occupying the TV, so I can't get to it anyway, and it's just so easy to pick it up and turn it on. And this sort of makes sense to get the Switch into people's hands cheaper and, in portable mode, for children to sort of get in there and maybe sort of work them up to the living room experience where they might, get a family Switch once they've got a personal one. And, this article it's kind of humorous, seeing the Switch Lite stick out of the pocket like that. Obviously, it's still a little big to put in a pocket. And XY Gaming raises $2.5 million for its global esports tournament platform. So this is sort of similar to the Play versus story that we saw just a few minutes ago. But again, obviously, esports is hot. People are raising money and this is a global tournament platform. I'm trying to think like what the difference between these platforms are. Obviously, there's a huge difference in the amount of money raised. We don't know what the equity is in that and whatnot. Probably the most important thing to keep in mind is just that there is a lot of money being poured into this segment. Esports are hot, and it's going to be something that can serve the world. So I wonder is anybody out there in the PixelFest community working on some type of esports platform? It'd be interesting to hear about it. And I have saved the best for last. So I mentioned in the very first PixelCast how I was playing Pilot Wings on the 3DS, and I had just gotten 100 after playing this game like 28 years on Lance's Pilot Wings segment, Hang Glider segment, that's what I meant to say. And so obviously the next week, the SNES library came out on the Switch, and you could play, it's cool, they had Stunt Race FX, they had Pilot Wings, even though they left it off the SNES Classic, they did remember to put that on the Switch incarnation, and one of the games on there is Demon's Crest. This is a really, really cool game. Now, I played Gargoyle's Quest on the Game Boy when I was a kid, 12, 13 years old. Had a really good time with it. It was one of my favorite games of all time. It was one that held my attention. It was like the whole summer I played this game is what it seemed like. I remember going to work with my dad and playing in the truck while we were driving, point A to point B. And this game, the gameplay is very similar. The graphics are obviously a lot better than that game, and the controls are very smooth and stuff. I played it on the SNES and got into it, and it was one that I thought, I think I'm gonna save this to kind of play through at Halloween time. So very cool game. The library is very cool. I'm glad that they included Pilot Wings on the Switch when they released the SNES library, and there's so many other great games on there as well. So okay, so now we are going to talk about Zelda: Link's Awakening. This game came out on Friday, something that I think I know I was excited for it, and I think there are a lot of other people that were very excited for this one. It's a remake, and I think it's a game that's been already remade maybe 4 times, including this version. I remember people having this in 1993, the original version that had come out, and I think a kid had it in my Spanish class. To tell you the truth, I remember. Now I never actually had that version of the game, and I'll tell you right off the bat, one of the things I love about this game is how much crossover content is in the game. For example, there is a Chomp Chomp called Bow Wow that kind of gets on your team and will like attack enemies for you, and that's a lot of fun. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I think I'm still pretty early on in the game, so hopefully I'm not giving too much away, and hopefully you've seen videos of that. If you haven't, I'm so sorry. I'm going to drop some more spoilers probably as I'm talking, so if you want to bow out of this portion and wait till I get onto the let's get techie with it side, feel free to do that at this point. One of the huts that you walk into has the character from the Super Nintendo version of SimCity. He says his name is Mr. Wright, W-R-I-T-E, and of course Will Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, was the original designer of SimCity, and he and Shigeru Miyamoto collaborated, I think it was for a short time, only a week or so, maybe it was a month, on the SimCity that was on Super Nintendo, which ended up being my favorite version of the game. You obviously have a great depth and obviously this original design that Will Wright brought to the table, but when he and Shigeru Miyamoto got together, I feel like that was the most fun version of the game. It sort of had these lessons, and there was like these statistics and like doing a budget and all this stuff, but then when partnered with Shigeru Miyamoto, there just seemed to be an extra little bit of like quaint, cutesy I don't know, trappings that got on, that were like added to this game and made it my favorite version of SimCity. And then I saw one of the characters in this Zelda game, and I was like, wow, how cool is that? And there's scenes where there are Goombas for you to jump on, so it's got there's some stuff from Mario in here. The art style of this game is, you can obviously in the background today you can see it, that's pretty much what the game looks like. It has this look like a Pixar, rendered movie, where the characters and everything seem to be very smooth, high polygon. They've got nice specular, highlights on them. There's, some bump mapping and stuff going on is what it looks like. And then there's like this field of view, full screen filter that I'm trying to think how to describe it. That's on the screen, where like the top and bottom portions of the screen are sort of blurred out and you can't quite see those too well, but everything in the middle looks razor sharp and super focused. And trying to think what else to say about this game. Having a great time playing it. I can't imagine anybody is not. It's got a very nice vibe and very nice ambiance and atmosphere while you're playing the game. And of course, the gameplay is a little older school, which I kind of appreciate. It's very quick to get in and out of. So being a busy person, I really, really, really like that and appreciate that. Some of the puzzles, I'm trying to think, it harkens back a little bit to the classic puzzles of Zelda games. And so, sometimes you're trudging around like, well, what am I supposed to do next? And when I was younger, and heck, I'm still incredibly hard-headed with it when it comes to like looking up things to solve puzzles. I like to solve things myself. That's kind of how I get my jollies. And so, but there are some times that I'm trudging around thinking maybe I should look this up. And that sort of goes on in this game a little bit. Now, one thing that I want to talk about, and this is going to tie into sort of our Let's Get Techy. Now, I didn't put the headlines up this week like I did last week, but essentially this is going to be the Let's Get Techy portion of the show. Now, with this game, in the reviews, one of the things I've noticed, people talking about the slowdown in the game. By and large, this game runs at 60 frames per second, and it's silky and buttery, and it looks beautiful with these, these graphics that look, high poly and smooth, these specular highlights. This sort of almost has this Pixar look to it. But whenever you transition scenes and you go, say, from one town, say, into like the mysterious forest, or even in this scene right up here, what we see is we see that you've got this full moon cello, and there's mysterious forest, and this is Gopongo Swamp. So these are just a couple of screenshots I took. Now, I tried to get video, but when you use the switch to capture video, it only records at 30 frames per second, and so the slowdown wasn't very apparent, so I couldn't use the video to really demonstrate this. But with each of these, what we see is the game cut from 60 down to 30 frames per second. Now, with this mysterious forest section, when this happened, I noticed, okay, well, I got into mysterious forest and it dipped. And then when I got onto, another section, it dipped. And I thought, well, maybe they just did this as like an attention getter when you switch sections. In case you don't see the wording pop up, they drop the frame rate to sort of get you to pay attention. Like, oh, why is the frame rate? Why is the game slowing down? But unfortunately, I don't think that it was a design choice so much as my guess is that the art team sort of won the argument against the engineering team as to, whether this game was going to run at 60 or 30 frames per second, and then whether or not this mattered. Now, from a gameplay perspective, I don't think it matters that the game slows down. And like I said, I don't think it's intentional just to be at these sections, because when you look at Goponga Swamp, this is an area with a lot of water, and this water is transparent. It obviously has a lot of effects on it, but you can see below it as well. And what we are really talking about here is a fill rate issue with the game. So what I want to do is use Zelda as a little bit of an example today of fill rate. I talk a little bit about why for this game it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect the gameplay, but if you're like a frame rate purist, this might drive you nuts. Now, I'm having a blast playing this game. Not a big deal, but it seemed like a good way to talk about something technical today. And we don't have to dive into code to do this. So I set up a simple scene in Unity to talk about this and show you what the frame debugger is in Unity and how to use that to organize a scene to maybe make the most of your fill rate, especially if you're on a processor, a graphics processor that is, limited by fill rate, which we tend to see on mobile devices or mobile processors like the one in the Nintendo Switch. So in each of these scenes, what we see is a layer of transparency that's rendered up above the rest of the graphics. In the mysterious forest, when you come in, there's almost like a full screen effect of this fog with the wording, and it fades out a little bit over time, but I think there's, even though some fog is hanging in there, it looks like there's like an extra gooey layer that's sort of foggy and has transparency there, which is, and what that is causing is for all of the pixels that have already been rendered, you basically layer when you're talking about fill rate, right? If you write to a pixel, you'd really like to only write to it once. That ideally, that's what you do, is write to each pixel on the screen only one time and not have to blend pixels down. Now, when you get into specular or bump mapping, or there's a lot of blended shaders, you start to get into having to write to pixels multiple times, do multiple render passes, and do these calculations. And of course, if you have a layer of transparency over top of some solid geometry, well, again, you're gonna have to render that geometry, and then you're gonna have to render that layer, and the layer of transparency has to be rendered above the solid geometry. You can't render it below, otherwise you won't see it, right? So what I wanted to do real quick is, and one thing I wanted to point out, this Goponga Swamp, this was the area that I think convinced me that this was going on in the game a lot. I noticed in some other areas now, but that it wasn't like an intentional design choice to do this as you were transitioning from one scene to another, because of that water. So I'm going to pull up Unity real quick here, and what I want to do is show you I've got the scene set up, and I've got the frame debugger window over on the right, and got the game view over here on the left. And what I've done is I've already gone in and I've set up a scene with 10 materials, and the way that this scene is organized is that the objects that are closer to the camera will be rendered first. And I think this might be sort of unintuitive for somebody who is drawing. I think typically if you're drawing a picture by hand, you would, you're going to draw, let me think, you're going to draw what's in the background first? Yeah, maybe you'll draw what's in the foreground first. I'm not an artist in that sense, so something to think about though, how you might draw it. Maybe it's the same way, right? So what I have here is an object that represents a cloud, and everything in the scene is just cubes, but there's various colors to represent things. So now we render a treetop, so the green layer is the treetop, and then you see some gray pop up in sort of the middle to the right of the cloud and the treetop. That's supposed to be a bird, if we had a bird. And what I'm doing is I'm stepping through on the right side here. Now what you see is a tree trunk being rendered. And then we have an enemy getting rendered. And now what we'll see on the left side of the screen is basically like the edges of a pond getting rendered. I just made like a really little pond. And you see that, dot, dot. And then what we're going to see is the water get rendered. And then what we're going to see is the ground get rendered. So what goes on here is that this is how you would organize things. And I had to choose shaders that had the render queue option to set the scene up this way, because otherwise it would render, sort of as, and I'm trying to think, it will render on its own, according to material or the way the thing's placed in the scene or the distance from the camera. And the way this was rendered is intentionally to render that cloud first, because look at how big that white box is on screen. That is a lot of pixels, and this is not a transparent object. So what's going to happen is any of the other pixels, ideally, right, and it depends on the GPU, it depends on the hardware, but ideally I don't want to render any other pixels in that area again. And if I write that big cloud there, that takes out a huge chunk of pixels that don't have to be written to again. Now, if the cloud was transparent, of course, I would have to write again, and depending on the GPU, I would take a big processing hit on that. In fact, I've seen games that have gone from 60 or 80 frames per second down to 30 or 20 just because like one quad is being rendered like this, and what it's done is it's pushed the machine past its fill rate limit, and now all of a sudden it can't write that many times to the screen, that many pixels to the screen. And I've seen tremendous increases in performance by sort of rendering these objects up closer and either taking away transparency and basically making sure the scene is organized in a way too where you don't have duplicate materials. Like one of the biggest mistakes you could make is to have a cloud here and then have a cloud behind all of this stuff, right? If there was a cloud behind, like sort of under the ground that used the same material as this cloud, then all of a sudden the two clouds would render at the same time, because some systems, what they do is they queue up by material, right? So the system I'm using here is queued up by material. I've taken a material, called it cloud. I've given it the 0, basically in the render queue. I've said, hey, render this first. Well, if there was a cloud behind all of this stuff and it had to render, and say it was in the lower left or lower right portion of the screen, depending on where it is, the ground might have to render there again, the enemy might have to render there again, the tree might have to render there again, the bird might have to render there again, and any of those operations, of course, are causing me to have to write to these pixels again. And so, the way this scene is laid out, and I'm going to sort of back it up. It is, mostly set up so that we don't have to render, large swaths of pixels, in the same portion of the screen again. And there's some of these GPUs, the way that they work is they will occlude this way, and so you'll get an extremely large performance boost if you can figure out how to queue up your scene like this, and of course, avoiding transparency and so on and so forth. Now, I took this example and I simplified it a little bit. I was going to get into, putting up some transparency and showing off some of the, the stats and the changes. It's something that I didn't have enough time to do this week, but this is probably something that we will revisit in the future to, to explain in more depth and, maybe on the right type of hardware as well, because I'm rendering this currently on a MacBook Pro. And this machine is not stressed out for fill rate, with these current effects and using these objects. But I did what I wanted to point out and make make readily apparent was there are ways in which you can control the render order of the objects in your scene to get a nice big performance boost. And coming back to Zelda, let's see here. And where are we at? Oh. So anyway, coming back to Zelda, like I was saying, it's one of these things where it looks apparent that, now to me, there might be a fill rate issue that could be solved, but I think more than likely what happened here was there was a very beautiful and intentional art direction with this game, and there obviously there was a team of engineers that were working on this to get the most out of the system. We know that the Switch isn't the most powerful system, and we've seen some really impressive games considering the hardware that it's running. In this case, I think we have a game that's pushing the system to its limit, and at some point, of course, the artists and the developers on this game are probably butting heads. Which way we go? I want it to run solid 60 frames per second, and on the art side, well, I'm sorry, that just doesn't really sell the experience we're trying to do. And there's a little bit of compromise here. The game runs for the most part at 60 frames per second, and then every now and again you'll get into a section where it looks like it's probably running somewhere between 20 and 30 frames per second. This swamp area is one of the ones where you're trudging through here, and that frame rate it's a chugging, and hitting those fish is actually pretty difficult because the frame rate is so low. But it's never to the point where you're like losing at the game or really getting too frustrated. Like, you can navigate around these fish, and you have to be a little bit more careful and take a little bit more time than you might otherwise. But it doesn't seem to be really like a huge issue or something that is going to stop people from enjoying this game. And so yeah, it's a great game. Of course, I recommend that everybody check it out if you have a Switch. Look at this thing. It's beautiful, it's quaint, it's fun. It's, some great problem solving. There's a lot of crossover with other Nintendo IPs, and it's an all-around good time. So I'm glad I got to take this opportunity to dive in, explain the frame debugger. If you if you used Unity, this might be something for you to check out. Get in, check out the frame debugger. Arrange a simple scene. Look at your materials. Now, some materials don't give you the option to control the render queuing, and others do. If need be, write custom shaders, get in there and make sure you've got that ability to control it. And this all depends on your scene. If you're doing something like a Zelda, where that the camera is always going to be rendering from like one vantage point, essentially relative to the scene, you could make a lot of use of the frame debugger. And so definitely something to be aware of if you weren't. I think this is something that we don't hear enough about, and it's one of those things where you can make huge gains in the performance of your game if you arrange it properly. And maybe we'll see an update with Zelda where these engineers are still cranking away trying to figure out how to get this game to look as it's supposed to look according to the art direction and so on and so forth, and maybe they can keep this thing running at 60 frames per second constantly. It is a real challenge. I know that we see player reviews and things come out and they'll say, how come this game doesn't run at 60 frames per second? How come it doesn't run at this certain resolution? And I could say it's a real challenge. So don't judge until you get into yourself and try to see and make something work. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and bid you good evening. It has been great. This has been PixelCast 4. I'm Jeremy Alessi, founder of PixelFest. Our mission is growing through love of games, and I hope you will stick around and subscribe and comment and like, and we'll catch you next time.